This is the most populous city in the United States. It is also home to a lot of rats, about 3 million of them. 3 million.
Dr. Rachel Okafor had been tracking rat complaint data from New York City's 311 system for 11 years. She knew what the numbers were supposed to look like before she ever opened the dashboard. She knew the seasonal patterns, the neighborhood density indices, the block cluster complaint rates that had defined every survey season since her first year mapping urban rodent pressure across the 5 boroughs. On a Wednesday morning in November, she pulled the complaint data for a specific block cluster in Upper Manhattan that had logged the highest consistent rat sighting density of any zone in her monitoring area for 6 consecutive years. And she sat at her desk for a long time before she picked up the phone. The numbers were moving in the wrong direction, wrong for rats, right for every other living thing in that neighborhood. She had never seen that before, not once in 11 years. She called the Urban Ecology Coordination Office and said 5 words. Something is hunting them up there, because something is happening in specific block clusters and park corridor zones across Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx that no extermination contract and no sanitation initiative and no $32 million city rat reduction program has ever managed to produce. Norway rat populations in those specific zones are declining measurably without any human removal program to explain the numbers, and the explanation points toward native predators that were functionally absent from New York City airspace for most of the 20th century. Predators that have been quietly coming back and doing something after dark above the streets of the most rat-infested city in America that nobody designed a program around. To understand why disappearing rats in New York City corridors is such a significant development, you first have to understand what Norway rats have done to this city. These animals are not native to North America. They arrived in the 1700s on ships from Europe, stowing away in cargo holds and establishing in the New World, the same way they had established in every port city their ships had visited across 3 centuries of oceanic trade. By the time anyone recognized what was happening, the population was already uncountable. In 2014, a statistician at Fordham University named Jonathan Auerbach estimated 2 million rats in the 5 boroughs using 311 complaint data. By 2023, a new study placed the number at 3 million, nearly 1 rat for every 3 New York residents. The population had grown 50% in a decade, despite every removal effort the city could fund. The damage is not abstract. Norway rats chew through car wiring, causing fires in residential parking structures. They burrow beneath building foundations, compromising structural integrity in ways that owners discover only after the damage has compounded for years. They contaminate food supplies across the restaurant and grocery infrastructure of a city that serves 8 million people daily. They carry over 35 documented human pathogens, including leptospirosis, salmonella, and the bacteria responsible for bubonic plague. In 2023, New York recorded a record 24 leptospirosis cases. The annual financial damage from rat activity across American cities runs to an estimated $27 billion. In New York alone, the figure exceeds $1 billion annually when infrastructure damage, health costs, and food contamination losses are total. New York fought back with everything it had. The city launched a $32 million rat reduction initiative in 2017, targeting 3 high-density neighborhoods with a stated goal of 70% population reduction. Solar-powered compacting trash receptacles were installed across 336 locations. Increased trash pickup schedules were mandated. Illegal dumping fines were raised. The population absorbed every intervention and kept growing. Carbon monoxide was pumped into rat burrow systems across targeted zones. Snap trap networks were deployed by professional extermination teams operating on city contracts. Dog hunting teams worked Manhattan streets through the night, clearing dozens of animals per session. In 2023, the city hired a dedicated rat czar, a wildlife management director with a singular focus on rodent population reduction. That position generated international media coverage. The rat population crossed 3 million the same year the position was created. A veteran exterminator who had worked New York buildings for 20 years stated it plainly to a city council briefing. You give it a couple of months, and it is right back where it was. We have never found a tool capable of bending this population curve. The rats breed faster than any removal program can remove them, and they learn to avoid every intervention we have ever deployed. Researchers at Fordham University stated in published reports that predation by any introduced animal cannot reduce a rat population at city scale. Only eliminating the food source accomplishes that, and eliminating the food source in a city of 8 million people generating thousands of tons of organic waste daily has never been achieved anywhere. Then the 311 complaint data from specific zones in Upper Manhattan stopped making sense. Dr. Marcus Webb had been analyzing urban wildlife corridor data across New York City for 8 years. He had cross-referenced bird monitoring transects with mammal activity indices in park-adjacent block clusters across all 5 boroughs. When Rachel's complaint data from the Upper Manhattan cluster landed on his desk, he spent 3 weeks running it against every variable his 8 years of baseline data included before he drove to the site and stood on the roof of a parking structure at dusk and looked up. A peregrine falcon, not a single transient bird passing through, a resident pair nesting on the water tower of a building 2 blocks from the block cluster, showing the steepest rat complaint decline in Rachel's entire 11-year data set. The correlation between documented peregrine nesting establishment and declining rat complaint density in the adjacent block radius was not subtle. When he finally examined both data sets simultaneously, every zone showing measurable rat reduction had documented raptor activity concentrated in the airspace directly above the open corridor and lot habitat, where rat surface movement was highest during evening foraging hours. Peregrine falcons were functionally extinct across the eastern United States by the 1960s. DDT accumulated through the food chain and caused eggshell thinning that collapsed breeding populations from Maine to Florida. Federal protection under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Endangered Species Act stopped the chemical exposure. A coordinated reintroduction program beginning in the 1970s placed captive-bred birds on cliff faces and building ledges across the eastern seaboard. New York City proved to be extraordinary peregrine habitat. The vertical faces of skyscrapers replicated the cliff nesting environments the species had used for millions of years. The prey density of a city of 8 million people generated reliable pigeon and starling populations that sustained breeding pairs at densities no rural cliff environment could match. By 2020, New York City supported over 30 documented peregrine nesting pairs, the highest urban peregrine density of any city in North America. What the complaint data was showing in the specific zones of highest peregrine territory overlap was a behavioral suppression effect operating at street level below the nesting sites. Norway rats in open lot and rail yard habitat conduct the majority of their surface foraging movement between dusk and midnight. A peregrine pair holding territory above those open zones hunts that exact behavioral window. The strike from above is silent and arrives at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. A rat moving across open ground between burrow sites and food sources in a block cluster beneath an active peregrine territory has no behavioral encoding for a threat arriving vertically from above at that velocity. Norway rats evolved alongside ground-level predators. They are exquisitely sensitive to lateral threat signals. They have developed behavioral responses to cats, dogs, and human movement that are so refined that professional exterminators describe them as effectively impossible to approach without triggering avoidance. But that sensitivity is entirely horizontal. It scans the ground plane. It monitors shadows at street level. It has no equivalent response to aerial attack from a bird that was absent from this airspace for the entire period the urban rat population was establishing its behavioral norms. 300 years of New York rat evolution produced no encoding for what a peregrine falcon means, because for most of those 300 years, there was no peregrine falcon to encode. The great horned owl is contributing a second layer of suppression in the park-adjacent corridor zones, where peregrine nesting density is highest. Great horned owl pairs have established in Central Park, Prospect Park, and Pelham Bay Park at densities that wildlife surveys from 20 years ago did not record. A great horned owl hunting a park perimeter at 2 in the morning encounters rat foraging activity in the ground cover and open lawn margins that border the park edge. The owl's silent flight profile eliminates the sound cue that rats use to detect approaching threats at ground level. Its ability to hunt in near total darkness gives it access to rat foraging behavior during the late night hours, when peregrine activity has ceased and when rat movement in park-adjacent blocks is at its highest. A great horned owl can detect and strike a Norway rat from 60 feet above a darkened park path without producing any auditory signal that the rat's lateral threat scanning system can register. In zones where owl nesting territory and peregrine territory overlap, the rat complaint data shows declines operating across a longer daily window than either predator produces independently. The red-tailed hawk is producing a third layer of pressure during daylight hours in the open lot and construction corridor habitat that connects park zones across borough boundaries. Red-tailed hawks now nest on building ledges and water towers across all 5 boroughs at densities that represent a measurable range expansion from their historic New York footprint. In specific zones where red-tailed hawk daytime territory overlaps with great horned owl night territory and peregrine evening territory, the rat complaint data shows the steepest and most sustained declines in Dr. Webb's entire data set. None of this was planned. Peregrine falcon protection was designed to save a species from DDT-driven extinction. The reintroduction program was designed to restore a native bird to its historic range. Nobody included New York City rat suppression in any recovery planning document ever written for the Peregrine Falcon program. The $32 million rat reduction initiative did not reference raptors in any planning document. The rat czar position, created in 2023, did not include aerial predator monitoring in its operational framework. Great horned owl range expansion into urban park systems was tracked as a birding observation, not a rodent management outcome. Red-tailed hawk urban nesting was documented by wildlife photographers, not by rat control programs. The connection between 3 recovering native raptor species and measurably declining rat populations in specific New York City corridor zones was invisible until 11 years of complaint data moved in a direction nobody predicted, and a researcher looked up from the street to find out why. The city spent $32 million looking at street level. The answer was 60 feet above it. Dr. Okafor went back to that Upper Manhattan block cluster 4 times in the weeks following the initial discovery. She walked the perimeter blocks at dusk on each visit. On her 3rd visit, she watched a peregrine falcon strike a Norway rat crossing an open section of pavement between a building foundation and a parked vehicle on the eastern edge of the cluster. The strike took less than 2 seconds. The bird was gone before any pedestrian on the block had registered what happened. She stood on that pavement for several minutes afterward. In 11 years of tracking rat complaint data across New York City, she had never once watched the mechanism behind a declining number in her own data set. She noted the time, the location, the species, and the strike duration in her field log before she walked back to the subway. She had been reading declining complaint numbers in that cluster for 3 consecutive seasons without explanation. It had been 60 feet above her head every evening since the pair established that nesting site. Some things only fully make sense when you finally look up. Can the peregrine falcon, great horned owl, and red-tailed hawk recoveries expand fast enough through New York City's airspace and park corridor system to produce population-level effects on Norway rat density before the invasion reaches numbers that overwhelm any natural suppression these 3 species can generate? Drop your honest answer in the comments below. And if this story changed the way you think about what is already working above the streets of America's most rat-infested city right now, subscribe. We will see you in the next one.